Welcome everyone to the Xojo webinar. I am Paul Lefevre, the Xojo Developer Evangelist. And no, your screen is not confused, but because today we have a special guest speaker. We have Bob Keeney of BKeeney Software, and he's going to talk to you about a tool they have called ARGen for ActiveRecord and database usage. So Bob, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paul. Welcome, everybody, to this webinar. I am Bob Keeney. I'm the founder of BKeeney Software. And now I need to get the mouse working. There we go. So let's start about me. It's my favorite subject. Now, it's actually about BKeeney Software. But we'll start off with a little bit about me. I've been a Xojo developer since 2001-ish. I think the first version of Real Basic I used was roughly version 3.5, so it's been a while. We incorporated as a business in 2003 in the state of Kansas, and we are predominantly a Xojo consulting firm. We are located in Kansas City, but most of our clients are located elsewhere. We have a few clients in Kansas City, but most of them are not here. Currently, we have 4 full-time Xojo developers, and that includes one more or less full-time DBA, which leads to some interesting discussions every now and then. We, as a company, are active in the forums. We've been to most of the conferences. We've done lots of training. We do training videos, et cetera, et cetera. In all of our time, nearly 100% of all our apps have been database driven. And the handful of cases where we didn't have a database driving our application, I think in all but one case it probably should have been a database. So that's kind of where we're coming from when it comes to using Xojo and databases. So it's helpful to start off with explaining what Xojo does really well. First of all, Xojo is a great generic application development tool. You want to do Mac, Windows, Linux, utilities, even some low-level games, business apps, whatever. Xojo is a good start, and the fact that it's a rapid application development environment makes that really easy. It's also a pretty generic database tool. It works with a bunch of different databases and works with them natively on top of it. And plus, we've got ODBC, Monkey Bread has some other tools and all that. So besides being the generic application tool, it's kind of a generic database tool. And really what that means is it lets the developer do whatever they want, which is also a bad thing because there's no set way of doing things when it comes to application development or database development. So the sky's the limit, but it's also hard for new people to really get a feel for what's going on. So let's talk about what Xojo doesn't do well. So since the tool is a generic database tool, the IDE itself has no table or field knowledge. And by what I mean by that is you have to query the database for everything. The IDE itself doesn't know anything about anything unless you ask it specifically, and then you have to code it. So there's no way to know which fields are in a database unless you query for it, whether anything's been added, anything's been modified. You get no IDE help, such as autocomplete. So if you try to, one of the great things about Xojo is you can do the autocomplete for objects and properties and methods on those objects, and the IDE does none of that for you when it comes to databases. Likewise, it has no compiler help. So if you try to put a string into a date field in a database, the code editor has absolutely no problem doing that. And it's a data type mismatch. And then on top of that, some databases actually won't throw an error with that. It'll just happily try and comply with that. So you don't get an error. So there's a lot of things that are behind the scenes that it doesn't really help you much. The other thing that Xojo does not do is it doesn't do automatic database error checking, which means that you have to roll your own error checking. Now, this isn't very hard. I mean, it's only 3-4 lines of code, but you have to do that for every single database transaction. This includes inserts, updates, deletes, even SQL select statements should have error checking on them. If you've ever found yourself having data that didn't update or didn't insert, or a record set that was nil, that's probably because you didn't do error checking. And that's probably one of the most common issues with new people that are in Xojo or that come to Xojo. Other languages will do the automatic error checking and throw errors. And certainly we've seen in the new framework, especially on iOS, SQLite database for iOS actually does throw an exception for a database error. But for right now, we're not talking about that. Xojo does not do any automatic code generation related to databases, which means that you have to create everything from the connection to the insert to the update to the delete, everything. It's all up to you. And then, like everything else in Xojo, it won't create any UI for you. And most database applications have list forms and edit forms, and it's entirely up to you. Now, I said earlier, we are a Xojo consulting company. So for us, time is money. And the biggest time that we spend on any project is obviously development time. So when it comes to databases, we have to have the generic database code. We have list forms, edit forms, transactions. And then this last one, consistency among developers, is pretty important. Since we have 4 developers, it's nice that we kind of have the standards so that if I work on something, I can pass it off to Tim or Carol and Robert, and they all pretty much know how it's supposed to work. And likewise, if I get something from them that's using ARGen, it'll be consistent. And then the last part of that is testing. Because Xojo right now, I mean, if you do everything on your own, you have to do all your testing to make sure that you test every single runtime possibility, which means you have to run every select statement. If you have a filter, you have to run a filter, multiple types of filters, inserts, updates, deletes. All those things have to be done in testing to make sure that you don't have any errors. Now, that's not to say that our tool eliminates all of that. You still have to do that. But when it's generated by the tool, there's a whole lot less possibility of errors. And then obviously there are logic errors when it comes to testing your database. And we'll get into that now. But so over the course of 7 or 8 years, we created ActiveRecord. And you can still get ActiveRecord on our website, the complete classes, and you can just use it. However, ARGen is our ActiveRecord generator. And essentially what it's doing is it's abstracting database code into Xojo classes. So we have the classes for ActiveRecord, and then for every table and view that are in your database, there would be a corresponding class in Xojo. So if we have a users table, there will be a users class, and then all the fields will mimic, or all the fields in the table will become properties on that class. And it's a one-to-one relationship. The nice thing about it is we just have one generic save method, and it will use the right code. So internally, we check to see, is this a new record, in which case we do an insert statement, or is an existing record, in which case we'll use a update statement. But you as the developer, you don't care. You just hit .save and it'll work. So the other thing we have is we've got events to do code-related stuff. And what I mean by that is, say you've got a invoice, and you implement the event after save. And your invoice line items are an array on that object, and you would loop through that array and just do save for all the line items in there. So that becomes really nice because everything tends to be in one spot. So ActiveRecord itself, you set it up, you load the database, and it handles the relationships for you. So if your database has foreign keys set up in it already, we'll read it and we'll display those relationships for you. But one of the key things that we needed to add was the ability to define manual foreign keys. And this comes in quite a bit if you have a created by and modified by field in your table, you don't necessarily want to create the foreign key relationship to your users table. So we can set that up manually, and then ARGen will manually create some of those objects for you. And then we also do lazy loading of that related data. And lazy loading means that we don't actually load that data until you call for it. So in that invoice, we don't actually call the invoice line items until you actually call for it. And that does a number of things, speeds things up, and no, that's the main reason. It just speeds things up. And we've done that with quite a bit of success. Lazy loading is probably one of the better things that we've done, but we'll get into some more details on that later. And then finally, we added in version 2 the ability to generate list and edit form user interfaces. Now, these are really simplistic user interfaces, and it's not meant to be complete or anything like that. It's just meant to be a starter. Places all the controls on the form for you, creates a list for you, and creates some generic methods. So with that, let's go on to the demo. I'm going to start up ARGen, and right now we're at version 208. 209 should be available in the next week or so. And we're just going to do a simple project here. We're going to grab SQLite database. And we start off with some basic things. We need to fill it in. And we can create projects for desktop and web. Right now we'll just do desktop. And error handling style is basic, which is just simple. After every database statement, we say, are we going to check the database error? Or if we use the BKeeney Software way, we actually have overridden methods on the SQL select and execute and all that. It'll actually throw a database error. So one is the more traditional approach. The other one is a bit more advanced, where you have to do try catch to get all of your to catch all of your problems. We can handle dates that are in GMT offset of 0. Obviously, this is the older style, the old real basic frameworks. We have not converted it over to the new framework yet, and probably won't until there's more stuff for databases in the new framework. So in the next step, we select which tables we want to do, and we see that we got a couple of tables here that are really just belong to SQLite. And so we're going to bring all these over, and we can see we've got a few views here, and this is relatively new in ActiveRecord. And in the next step, we can look and see what the things are. So let's look at the artist table. We can see that we've got the artist ID, which is the integer. I mean, it's just the primary key, but we can change what it is. So if for whatever reason we wanted to enforce this to be int64, which, I mean, it's the primary key, it'll be int64 anyway, but we could come in here and say, rather than Boolean, this could be integer. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you could. And then certainly each field, can be whatever. So we can do enforce some things. We can say this must be unique, and we can do that for every single one of the tables and views that are in here. And obviously, views, it doesn't matter if it's unique or not. But we'll go to the next step. And this does auto create objects. So if we click on the album, we can see that we've got the artist ID, the foreign table is the artist, and the foreign column is artist ID. And when it says type here, this means what is the related data. So right now it's a single, which makes sense because the album only has one artist. However, we could go to invoice line item, and we could say Here's the invoice ID, here's the invoice, so it's the reverse one. Instead of single, this is really an array of objects. So, oh, I'm sorry, I did that wrong. That's single, that's the invoice. But if I do the invoice, we can add the manual relationship. Here's the invoice line. We set up the relationship, and we do create. And now we can say that this is an array of objects. So it'll create code in there that will automatically allow me to look at the invoice line items. And you can edit and delete all these relationships. Now, I'm going to go to this next step, which is the auto create UI. And this is going to let me say I want to create all the UI for this for every single object. I know this is a bad idea at this point because I'll show you in a minute, but I'm just going to create one artist at this point, or one list and edit form. And you can say from the artist, I want to create a list container, a list window, or both. We're just going to do the list window. And we have the same sort of options with the edit window. So we can either create the container, the window, or both. And the reason why you might want to do the container versus the window is if you're going to be using the same edit configuration in multiple places. Maybe an account might be a good example of this. In an accounting application, you might have several places where you're going to edit or be able to create an account. So the container might make a lot more sense. But for now, we'll just leave it at a window. Over here on the right-hand side, we've got the list explaining all of the fields that are in here. And the first column here is what type of control it's going to be. So we've got text field, labels, pop-up, all the generic stuff. The inactive is going to be a checkbox, and the name is a text field. And this is include in list box or not. So I do not want to include the ID. And I really don't want to include the inactive status in that list box either. In my initial sort on the list box, I want to sort by name. And that's really all I need to do. Now, if you've got a much more complex table, there'll be a whole lot more here, but for demonstration purposes, this is what's going to happen. So this final step is some of the settings for the created project. Now, we put everything in a namespace. You can change the namespace from the default of data, and we use prefixes on our properties that are on our tables. That are on the classes. So integer, double, strings, date times, Boolean, currency. Or you can use suffix, or you can use none of them. We've got the same thing with user interface objects. We like prefixes for windows and page controls, containers, etc. You can change these to whatever you want. And really that's all they're here for. So now when we say generate project, asks us for the location, and we'll hit save. And now we have a fully functioning object, or fully functioning project, that's ready to be opened in Xojo. So let me make this a little bigger here. All right, so you can see it creates an app object, and just a generic window doesn't do a darn thing. So if you were just to try and run this right now, it's not going to work, because what we've done is we've created a bunch of pragma errors. And these are places where we know you're going to have to do some work. So the first one is the initialize. So we don't really care about that at this point. It's going to open window 1, and that's fine for, we'll leave it in there for now. The get database file is going to get replaced. I can never remember the name of the file. Okay. And so now when we come to here, so I should back up just a little bit here. We created some UI for you. You know, I talked about the app object, the window, the menu bar. We created a generic UI folder. We've got some generic containers that we put in here. We've got an OK cancel, which is platform neutral, so it switches depending on what platform you're on. We've got an add, edit, delete that you can modify to whatever you want. We've got a page control, and we've got a page list. Some of these, you can get rid of them if you never use them. We've created a generic splash, about, and a preferences window. Use these or not, doesn't matter to us. And then we've grouped all of our windows by table. So we only selected one table to begin with. That was the artist. So we have a generic list, and you can see that the window just has a simple list box on it. Let's open it up in a new tab, and it comes with a bunch of methods, the events, and the controls have things in them as well. So let's start by looking at the open event. All it does is call load list. Load list creates a prepared statement. Actually, calls the build prepared statement, and you can go through and see, and you can see that it creates all this stuff. We have a base SQL that we create. If we have any search criteria, you can put it in here. We have instructions. You can do the order by, and we just simply return the statement. So at that point, we pass that into our list. And if we go back to here, we said we were in the namespace. So here's our data, here's our artist, and here's our list. So the way to go about accessing anything is data.artist and then whatever the functions are. So let's look at our data namespace. And here are our classes. Here's our artist. And we've got some shared methods in here. And here's all of our properties. Now these mirror the fields that are in this database. And then we've created some generic methods in here for is duplicate and delete OK. Now, right now, we're just returning true. Is duplicate is letting us know we can probably just simply uncomment all this, but it's there to be the basis for how do you want to check for duplicate methods or duplicate names in this table. So, and you can see that we've got one of those for every table and every view. And the one thing that happens in ActiveRecord is that when we first open the database, we get the database file, we get the SQLite file, here's the database file. We check to see, we do the connect, and then we register the tables and the views. And all it's doing is it's matching up the class. So here's the class with the table that we say it is, and it'll go through and match up the database field with the class property. And if it doesn't, then you'll get an error at runtime, not debug time, so that you know if you've got everything right. So we've got that. So let's go back to the load list, and then we get the array from the list, and we simply iterate through this, and we're adding to the row, and it's an array we pass in, so we do build row, and the only thing we're doing is the name. So the more complex list you have, the more you would do. So let's take a look at, it also comes with a list toolbar, sorry, and it's toolbar for this, and the action items that are on each one: handle add, handle edit, handle delete. Now you can see that here's our naming convention. The reason why we're not doing it in this method is because it's generic and it could be called from a menu item or another button or whatever. So we need to make sure that we can handle it from multiple places. So let's go in and look at the edit. So we're simply looking at the list. We're getting the selected record, and the selected record is just the row. We stash the item in the row tag when we load the list. We're getting that right there. And when we handle the edit, we check to make sure that our record isn't nil, and then we open the edit form. The delete is pretty simple here. We have another pragma error. I'm going to comment this one out, and I can uncomment this one because that's pretty much all we're going to want at this point. Although there's some issues with this because of the table that I've selected on this, but it's not that big of a deal at this point. So we're simply going to say, you know, we're going to do the alert, and this gets our response back. And then if our delete is okay, which is one of our shared methods that is on artist, or methods. So delete okay is simply returning true at this point. And if it's so, we can delete it. And we just simply call it using the delete method. So we've really written almost no code at this point. The handle edit should work. So now we should be able to run. Might have another pragma error somewhere in there. Yes. I'm just going to comment this out for now. And we started up with our blank database. So let's go back to our blank window, sorry. And rather than do window 1, let's do win artist list. So without doing anything, we automatically have a list form that will handle sorting for us automatically, and that's including if you have multiple rows. And if we try to do a double click, it tries to open our edit field or our edit window, but we don't have that connected yet. And this is where one of our other pragmas were. So if we look at the init, here's our pragma error. So I'm just going to delete that. And then I'm going to uncomment this code. And we've got we're trying to put a integer into a text label. So we've added some generic methods called toString. And really, that's all we need to load it. We can go and mess with our user interface some. To make it what we want it to be. And in a future version of ARGen, we're going to make this so that you can change the order of the fields that it creates. In which case, and that also will modify the order of the fields. And the only other thing we need to do to get it working right away is in the save, uncomment these 2 lines. It's basically taking the Boolean value from the checkbox and the text from the text field, putting it in there, and then doing save. And really, that's all we need. We'll do some validate here in a second. So now we have our AC/DC, and let's just call this AC/DC rocks. Automatically updated the list form, and automatically is updated for when we want to edit it again. We can do the same thing with new, and we're going to call this, quad A, whatever band that is, automatically added in there. So within the span of 5-10 minutes, and that's with me explaining things, we got a simple list form and an edit window going. And this is handy when it comes to doing all sorts of fun stuff. Earlier, I talked about things that could happen with invoices, and let's take a look at the invoice object. And you can say that we've got our same thing, load invoice line, and you might want to change these to, invoice line items or something like that. You can see it automatically returned an array of invoice line items. So we have properties on here for invoice line items. So that's a property on the class. And this is the lazy loading I was talking to you about. So if we've never tried to load this invoice before, meaning our array has nothing in it, or we pass in the forced load, it's going to call the shared method list from the invoice line item, and here is the string it's going to pass in. So you can be pretty sure that this is going to work properly. So let's take a look at the list. And right now, we're passing in the criteria rather than a statement, but all we're doing is we're getting the base SQL, we're passing in the criteria, and we've not done the order, but if you wanted to, you would just comment in here, and maybe the order by is, and since I don't actually remember what the name of the field is, let's take a look at it. So invoice line item, we probably want to do invoice line ID. And that would automatically order it by how it was entered into the database. And then we do all the things here. And so this becomes handy. So I talked about events earlier. Let's talk about adding an event to the invoice. I already added that. So I'm going to add an event handler in here. And in the after save events, this event will get called. And I can just do a for each statement. And now, oh, I forgot one thing. All right, so basically what I'm doing here is I'm looping through the invoice. I'm setting the invoice ID of the line to match that of the invoice ID, and then I'm calling save, and that's all I have to do. Now, the beautiful thing about the after any of the events is that these are part of the original transaction. So when I call invoice.save, and then I do this, everything in here is in that transaction. So if there were any issues with errors or anything like that, that would throw an exception using our method, or a database error using the normal methods, it would back out of it, and you'd have to do a little work to make sure that you've handled that properly. But a lot of that is handled for you automatically. So that is pretty much it. A lot of database programming is just rinse, recycle, repeat, and ARGen does that really, really well. So let's talk about some miscellaneous stuff that is in ARGen and ActiveRecord. We have a generic isNew method that will tell you, that simply returns a Boolean to tell you if it's a new record or not. That way you don't have to check to see if the primary key has been set or not. That's really what it's doing behind the scenes, but you don't have to worry about it. We have an isModified method, and that returns a Boolean, but behind the scenes we have a saved property value dictionary that when you first load up the class, so when you say load or find, read record, it will put a property of the initial values in here. So what's kind of nice, this comes in handy, is if you're doing like an audit trail or something, in the after save event, you can go, or before save event, doesn't really matter, you can go, do I need to do something for the audit trail? So isModified, yes, you can loop through this dictionary to see and then compare the values in the dictionary or in the current object to see if any of them have changed, and change the things that, or put things into the audit trail that you want to. The other thing that I almost showed was that the ID, or every ActiveRecord object, has an ID property. And really what that is an alias for the primary key field. So for example, in users, we would have a primary key field of user ID. Internally, we have ID, which is just an alias for that. We tend not to use this, but we put that in because a lot of developers like to use ID. So it's there for that. One big thing that that we find really handy is, especially on big projects, people add fields all the time. While you're doing a run debug, if you've added a field, it will actually throw an exception and tell you what field is missing from what table. Now, if you're at runtime, meaning a final executable, not in debug, it won't do anything. It'll just keep going. The other thing that ARGen tends to do is it forces all the database-specific code into the ActiveRecord classes. And by the ActiveRecord classes, I mean things that are in the namespace. It's very handy for one place to have most of the DB code. I mentioned transactions earlier. They occur automatically when you hit save, delete. All that happens inside of a transaction. Anything that any code that you put in the events are also in that very same transaction, but we also have ways of doing manual override on the transactions. Now, I would be remiss about talking to you about ARGen without telling you some of the drawbacks. The first one is that it loads the entire record. So if you have a table with 255 fields on it, which I think is a bad idea, but if you tried to load that record up, ARGen will load the entire record. There's no such thing as saying, can I just do 3 or 4 fields off this record? The answer is no. If you want to do that for a list or something like that, views are a really good alternative. Matter of fact, I would highly recommend using views because they are really good at things like that. The other thing that are really bad is images and blobs. Since all these things take up time and memory, images and blobs can take a long time. So they should be in a separate table and then lazy loaded. We've done this with a number of items. One project we stored images, and some of these images would get 2-3 megabytes in size. And another project we did, we stored documents in the database. Yeah, I know it's not a great idea, but that's what they wanted. And so we had a separate table just for those blobs. And then the customer record would load up the document list, and the document list would load up the blobs as they requested it, not when they requested the document, or when the document list was shown. The other thing, I showed the registration method. It does require that the tables and views be registered with ActiveRecord. This involves a little bit of overhead from introspection, so it's not really fast starting up, but most people never notice it because the UI is busy opening and things like that. So haven't had too many issues with that. And finally, we didn't show a web app, but we could certainly do that. The web app takes great pains to make sure that the web sessions and any threads, like through handle special URL or things like that, use their own special, you create their own connections. So that's kind of a critical piece when it comes to web apps. Every thread and web session needs to have its own separate connection. Otherwise, transactions may not work properly. So that's it. We are always working on upgrading ARGen. On the next version, we've got, and I meant to show it to you today. It wasn't quite ready for prime time, but we are allowing ordering of fields allowing the ordering of fields. This will allow you to change how the list works, the list form works, and which order the controls are placed on the edit form. So one more thing to be able to do things up front, and then do less work after the fact. We're now going to have labels to the side in addition to no labels. We're going to lazy load objects, when we lazy load the objects, we're going to use the table name rather than the field name. If you saw on the invoice, it was the invoice line rather than as the invoice line item ID rather than the invoice line. That can be confusing to some people. We'll have more code filled in for you so that there's a few less pragma errors in there. We'll use better prepared statements for all the different databases. Right now, it likes to put in SQLite for all the prepared statements, and that can cause some issues. And then we've got a number of bug fixes that are in there. So let's talk about pricing. We've got ARGen is available for free, and free has a little nag screen on it, but you're limited to 2 tables and views at a time, and it doesn't do any UI generation. The 199 version allows you to do unlimited tables and views, and allows you to generate the user interface. And we've been pretty happy with the response of it, and we get a lot of downloads and people are using it, and we get a lot of questions on ARGen. So we're happy with what people are using it for, and we hope you do too. So at this point, if you have any questions, I will hopefully be able to answer them. There's the URL for the product, and there is my personal email address at the bottom of the screen. So go ahead and shoot away.
I don't see a lot of questions on the Q&A board at the moment.
Yep. Oh, okay. The question is, most projects start small. How is working with ARGen in the process of modifying and extending projects? That's a really common question, and I'm glad you brought that up. Typically what we do is we don't generate all of the UI at once. Most projects start off, you start small. I'm going to work on this table today, so I'm going to do all the UI for that. You do that, and then you go back to ARGen, you generate the next table, and the UI. Sometimes we generate all the tables up front. Sometimes we just do the table and the UI at the same time, and then copy and paste into our existing project. We almost never go the other way. So we almost always have our base project because we've got all of our other stuff that could be in there, all of our subclasses, all of our helper classes that aren't necessarily generated by ARGen. And so we don't want to wipe all those out. So we copy and paste from the generated project into our real project. And then the other question is, what features could Xojo add to the IDE to make it easier to extend ARGen? Well, certainly one of the things that they don't do well right now is they have table schema, which is great, but it doesn't work for views. So you have to query each database specifically for views, which it's not very hard, but it's just one more step that we had to do. And I think one of the issues that most people have when they start off with using Xojo, depending on what platform they've come from previously, is the lack of throwing an exception for a database error. I think if I had one thing I wanted out of Xojo, that would be it. Now, throwing exceptions causes other issues because the exceptions, you need to put everything in a try-catch loop or try-catch block so that it can you can actually do something with it. Otherwise, your application just quits, or you have to do some other sort of handling. As far as other things that Xojo could do, I think that really kind of depends on where they want the product to go. We use ARGen because it helps us do our projects quickly, but I don't know if an ORM sort of solution makes sense for everybody. Really, behind the scenes, ActiveRecord is really just using the base classes internally, so there's nothing special that I think. But I also think that doing something similar to ARGen or ActiveRecord in Xojo would help out a lot of people. But on the flip side of that is people don't necessarily learn the basics of the database classes. So they use ARGen and ActiveRecord as a crutch rather than learning what's behind the scenes. And that was a long roundabout answer for I don't know. Okay, well, Paul, I guess I'll turn it back over to you. If you guys have any questions, feel free to email me, and certainly this will be posted up on YouTube or the website eventually, so you can always come back to it at some point.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. Yes, this will be available on YouTube within a day or two, so that you can, watch it in slow motion and pause it when Bob is showing you all those cool bits of code.
Sorry, I did have a tendency to fly through those. I see it every day, so I don't think about it.
No, I get that a lot from people that watch webinars. That's one of the things they like about the recording, even if they sat through it, is they want to be able to listen, pause, maybe switch over to Xojo, look at some code, start the recording back up. So it's a helpful way for people to learn and play around. So yes, recording definitely up in a day or two. I'll have the follow-up email on the webinar, include a link to that.
Okay, awesome.
Thanks everyone for attending, and thank you again, Bob. Have a great day, everyone.